It's an idyllic scene, isn't it? Except that it's 4:30 in the morning and this guy won't finish until sunset. It's a hard day's night being a farmer. We all wanted to drive tractors when we were kids. Wonderful. And some of us, if we were lucky, even got to drive them for real when we were older. But this machine is not a toy. It's a vital part of the farmer's day, and if it stops working, the farmer's livelihood stops with it. A vital part of keeping things going is the powertrain. The powertrain includes clutches, the transmission, the axle and differential, the wet brakes, planetary gear sets, hydraulics, and power takeoff. And the lubrication of this powertrain is vitally important. That's what we're looking at today, the importance of tractor lubricants. Pre-mechanisation, the farmer had to look after the hooves instead of four wheels. Work in the fields began and ended with a healthy horse. Some say that a farmer would give up his own food so that the horse would have a full stomach for the day ahead. And if the horse was working hard, then the crop cycle would continue and the farmer lived. It was a stark reality, yet a true one. This machine's insides are just as fussy and as delicate as its equine predecessor. We ask more and more of our machines all the time. You put the wrong lubricant in and the machine gets damaged, or even worse, it stops. And from 1 horsepower to hundreds of them. But just how much does the modern day farmer rely on the tractor and other machines like it? Before we go any further, can you tell me what kind of farming you do here?
Well, this farm's a biodynamic farm, and it's a mixed farm, and it's about 300 acres, half of which is combinable crops.
With that kind of farming, how important to you is the tractor in your day-to-day work?
It is mightily important. We have to muck spread, and we've got to make the hay, which has been rained on today, and so we'll have to turn it, and if the tractor goes down, it just sits there. Or we have to try and get another tractor or a contractor to come and do it. Worst case scenario, something goes seriously wrong with one of the tractors. What do you do? Well, we have to get a mechanic in, or we fix it ourselves. Failing that, we have to get a contractor in to finish the work that we've perhaps started, and which costs us money, and fixing the tractor also costs us money, and so we don't really want to go there. So it would seem that not only is the farmer an agricultural and horticultural expert, but he's a mechanic as well. Now, as Sean said, the big jobs will always go to the dealerships or freelance mechanics, but that's yet more money going out. It would appear that if the farmer appreciates just why the right lubricant makes for a correctly functioning powertrain, then the performance of the tractor is maximised, which is good news for everyone. Of course, it's not just tractors that have powertrains, so do combines. Now, I thought it might be useful to review just what the lubricant is required to do in that powertrain. So this is one of the components we mentioned. James, can you tell us what's going to happen if we put the wrong oil in this component?
Sure thing, Andy. Well, this is a completely different transmission to the one you've just seen outside. This is a real basic synchromesh unit, but nevertheless, we've got some components in here which are very sensitive to the transmission fluid. For instance, here at the front, we've got a wet multiplate clutch, and that is got friction material in it, and it needs the correct friction characteristics in the transmission fluid. Coming back, we've got a synchromesh unit in here, and again, these synchromeshes and the cones all require the correct friction material of the lubricant so they perform properly. Just diving deeper into the transmission, we've got the differential in here with the crown and pinion gears, which are spiral bevel gears. Those spiral bevel gears need a certain lubrication and need to be looked after, whereas in a different sense, the final reduction gear here, because these are helical cut gears, they have different wear characteristics and need different lubrication characteristics. And now let me show you something else.
Okay, so James, what are we looking at on this bit of kit?
Okay, well the really nice thing about this cutaway is we can see the brakes much more clearly. So here is actual brake disc and the friction material on the brake disc, and there's a large piston which is acting on here to squeeze up the brakes and actually engage the brakes.
Of course, when we're talking about wet brakes, we're not just talking about stopping, are we? We're talking about steering as well.
Absolutely, because on a tractor, the brake on the left-hand side and the right-hand side can be engaged separately, and farmers will use that to achieve real tight turns on the headland, especially when you've got mounted implements on the back. So these brakes are really sensitive, as we've spoken about already, sensitive to the friction materials and sensitive to moisture getting into the brakes. And friction, properties of the lubricant, one of the ways you can actually hear that as an operator is when it's unbalanced, when it's not correct, you'll get a squawk and a real horrible chatter as the brake grabs and then lets go and grabs and lets go. And it does a horrible job to the whole of the transmission because you get some real horrible peak loadings come in and eventually you'll destroy this friction lining and create lots of problems. Just whilst we're here, Andy, I can show you a couple of other things. This is the hydraulic pump on this particular tractor, and of course we're using this transmission fluid as a hydraulic fluid as well. It's all the same fluid, so it's being pumped out through these selective control valves, and the farmer can plug implements into the back of the tractor and use the hydraulic power to operate hydraulic rams, for instance, on tipping trailers or hydraulic motors. And of course on the tractor itself, you've got the power steering, which is another application for hydraulic power. The other thing we can see whilst we're here is the final drive on this particular tractor, and now we use an epicyclic unit because once the power gets through to this final shaft, which is still spinning reasonably fast, we need to reduce that RPM for the back wheels of the tractor. So we reduce it an awful lot, and as that happens, the torque loading absolutely goes through the roof. So these three gears here, you can see they're huge, great big gears. They have to transmit a lot of power, and it's absolutely crucial that our good old transmission fluid is looking after these gears and is lubricating them properly.
Again, so the three main points we're looking at are friction,
yeah,
anti-wear,
yeah,
and moisture control.
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, I want to show you one more thing about the different sorts of transmissions that we have. It's right over here. So what I want to show you here, Andy, is some of the different transmissions that farmers are using in their equipment. We started out earlier on looking at the synchromesh unit, which gave the farmer maybe 16 forward speeds, maybe in later units 32 forward speeds. But that really wasn't enough for what modern farming's demanding, where the farmer needs to be able to exactly match the forward speed he's looking for, and he's also wanting to be able to change speed on the go. So he wants to be able to change the gear, but not put his foot on the clutch. So he keeps on powering, especially if you've got an implement in the ground. So that's why power shift transmissions were developed. And the power shift, this unit gives you 16 forward gears, change on the go, full power, absolutely fantastic. But of course, even that's not enough. And the farmers wanted the ability to go and finely tune their forward speed to the job in hand. And that's where the unit that's behind you, and you saw with Richard outside, we got an infinitely variable transmission, an IVT. We look at this model here, both a power shift and an IVT use epicyclic components. The big difference is that on an IVT we're able to rotate the ring gear. So here we go. We have the power coming in on the sun gear and going out on the pinion carrier. And you can see even now we've got a big reduction in RPM. The clever thing is to be able to rotate the ring, and what's happening now is we're changing the RPM coming out on the pinion carrier. And in fact, if you spin that fast enough, you can absolutely stop that pinion gear rotating. So we can have lots of power going into the transmission, lots of gears rotating, tractor's going nowhere.
So before we go any further, I'm presuming with the amount of movement going on with this gearing that the demands on the lubricant are much higher.
There certainly are. You can see there's so many gears in mesh all the time and constantly working. And with all the demands that are going into this transmission, that's creating a huge load on the transmission fluid, and the anti-wear characteristics are absolutely crucial.
Okay, so the one main point that we're getting from looking at all these components is that the correct use of lubricant is absolutely vital.
It certainly is, yes.
Oh, lovely. Thanks very much for your time, James.
You're welcome.
It seems that the misuse of lubricants boils down to two things. Firstly, just sheer ignorance of the correct usage through a lack of knowledge. And secondly, and this surprised me, the use of cheaper alternatives that in the long term can run to higher repair costs. I think we need a definitive answer. I need to talk to someone who understands why the right additives for the right lubricants are right for your powertrain. We've come to a leading additive manufacturer, Lubrizol. Their technical and marketing centre for Europe is based in Derbyshire, and they supply additive technology for use in tractor lubricants. Lubricants that are used by farmers, dealers and manufacturers. We're going to talk to Phil Carey, the driveline testing manager, about the importance of powertrain additives. Phil, we've been talking to farmers and manufacturers about the importance of the correct usage of lubricant within the tractor, particularly the powertrain. Now, Lubrizol design additive technology for the use in these lubricants. So what kind of additives are we talking about?
A good tractor lubricant is a function of a number of factors of the additive. Viscosity modifiers control the viscosity and the thickness of the oil as temperature varies. Oxidation inhibitors prevent the buildup of sludge and particles within the oil. Anti-foam is responsible for preventing foaming within the oil, which reduces the lubrication effectiveness. Friction modifiers control the friction within the synchronizers and also the performance of the wet brakes and the power takeoff clutches. Rust inhibitors do exactly what they do. They prevent rust building up because there's a very wet environment that tractors work in. And also anti-wear agents. They're responsible for preventing most of the components wearing out, but have to be part of a balanced system.
You've just talked about wear there, Phil, so tell me a little more about anti-wear agents.
Well, anti-wear agents are quite complicated chemicals because they have to be balanced correctly within the powertrain lubricant. Here I've got an example of a tractor transmission that's actually failed due to wear in the system. Here, looking inside this gearbox, we can see the damage that's caused on gear teeth by an imbalanced anti-wear system. Here you can see damage on the flanks of the teeth and even a tooth that's broken off. This is caused by the anti-wear component not being able to prevent metal on contact. And as well as preventing wear on the metallic gear components, the anti-wear system has got to be balanced to prevent damage to the hydraulic system and also synchronizers and wet brakes and seals and all the other critical components within the powertrain.
You've talked about why anti-wear agents are important, so tell me why friction modifiers are so important.
Friction modifiers are important because they perform a number of roles within the powertrain. They're responsible for smooth gear engagement, but significantly, when it comes to the wet brakes, they perform a critical role in making sure you've got efficient stopping of the vehicle, holding of it on a slope, and also the friction modifier is responsible for making sure that the wet brakes themselves don't delaminate like this one has in service due to a poor balance of the friction modifier and anti-wear systems. So the friction modifier itself is a key component in making sure the vehicle performs efficiently and effectively on the farm.
Phil, these machines are out in all kinds of weather, so how much of an issue is water?
In the hydraulic system, if we get water in the hydraulic fluid, you'll find that you get damage on the hydraulic pumps, around the seals, the hydraulic rams don't perform so well. So our chemistry is designed so that the water's held in a safe form where it doesn't affect the performance of all these elements of the system.
Oh, thanks for that, Phil. At least now I appreciate just why the right additive is so important to the final lubricant.
You're welcome.
So we're back where we began, and I now realise that this is a rare sight when the farmer calls upon his machines to do more and more. I hope you found our journey interesting and learned some things along the way that you didn't already know about powertrains and the correct usage of lubricants within them. You know how much it costs to have a tractor in the workshop with crops spoiling in a field, and you now know how the correct additive can protect that tractor. I hope you get many more years' life from the tractor you own or hire, and that you now know how to protect those tractors using the right lubricant. It really does make all the difference, from sunrise to sunset.